Welcome to another episode of Imagine the Possibilities. I'm Joseph, and with me is...
Mcleod, as always. I'm here to basically do what all nerds do, talk about an idea for a game that I had, and as a person with absolutely no ability to program, I'm going to pretend like everybody should stop what they're doing and make the game I want them to make. I want to put a big fat disclaimer right here saying that neither of us have any sort of career. We are talking, of course, about a political game, obviously. I mean, there are plenty of political simulators out there in one fashion or another, but usually we're talking about something like SimCity or Civilization, where you
Tropico.
have Tropico, where you have pretty much carte blanche as far as powers, like what you say goes. So that's an interesting way of doing it. But I was thinking that instead of doing that, you can just try to make a simulator as close to real life as possible by putting you in like the seat of arguably the most powerful person on the planet, the President of the United States of America. One of the things about this is that everyone seems to hear the President of the United States of America and think like, oh, well, this person's in charge. He's the one who's doing everything. Well, if you've taken even a high school, government's class, you know that's not the case. The government has actually very little to do with many of the things that we do on a day-to-day or we see in there. And in the backdrop of the whole government shutdown thing that's going on right now, which will probably be old hat by the time this comes out, but whatever. People are quick to say, anything that happens on is the president's fault. We were making a joke about this where you and I were saying the "Thanks Obama" meme has been around since he's been president, but that's gone back basically as far as we've had presidents. Every president has had that, where anything that goes on gets attributed directly to them,
Yep.
despite the fact that oftentimes they've got absolutely no power over it.
Yeah, and also, and this is the one little thing that I'm just going to dip in, the whole government shutdown thing. This isn't the first time this has happened. It happened 27 years ago. So, I mean, things repeat themselves too.
Like I said, we're not going to get into this because neither of us have the
The
know-how.
degrees.
When you look at it from the outside, it's like, well, obviously they should do this. Like, well, it's almost never that simple. In fact, it is never that simple. I'm just going to go out and say it because there's always going to be some external factor, and that's the entire point of this game, is to give you that kind of feeling of you are the president, you're the most powerful person in the world, but also kind of have a game that kind of messes with you the entire time.
Yep.
It kind of plays against you. Now, it's not to do this maliciously. Like, you would have a whole system set up to work against people or certain political groups, and there's a degree of randomness to what's going on because the presidency is a lot more reactionary than it is action. It's reacting to what happens around them or what the will of the people is at the time.
So let's just kind of go into it. First off, in any kind of a game, you would choose skills, whether you have silver tongue or
Or you just have
you
like
have you
a
come
particular
from money,
backer.
or yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So you
or
have these sets of skills, almost Sims kind of.
some
Um,
style kind of, you can take a few bonuses, or you can take a few bonuses and negatives, and that would really give your character like a few more options or a few less options depending on the situation. If they're a silver tongued devil that can talk people into the way of doing it, maybe that for half the people out there, they hear you and they're going to start following you around, whatever. But the other half, they just hear you and they immediately think like, I'm not going to trust this guy. He seems like he's got something under his sleeve.
exactly. And then of
So
course, as you set up your character with whatever skills, you don't start off in the presidency. You start
yeah,
off as a running person.
as a candidate.
As a candidate, sure. I was
Candidate.
thinking running mate, and then I'm like,
Well, yeah,
I
it
don't
was
know.
because you would need to
But
choose your running
you
mate
need to choose your running mate too.
during the candidacy, and we'll get into that in a second. The game would have to start with you as a candidate entirely because that's kind of how a presidency starts. It's not you get into the White House and you're completely absolved of all sin. And that's another problem with a lot of games, is that they have you start off, oh, bam, you're president. That doesn't help anything because you're able to go in there and like you're not beholden to anyone. Like, that's never happened. You have to make deals while you're campaigning. Like, to get elected, you have to cut deals with people. You have to say you're going to do one thing. You have to raise money. And the people who are giving you money aren't always the people with the best interests at heart. Some of them are. Some of them actually are. That drug company out there that isn't, turning all of their research people into zombies for bioweapons, umbrella style.
I mean, anything you make a promise of in your running can come either to help you or hurt you. I mean,
Yeah, it's
you say, oh, when I get into presidency, I'm say going to allow drilling in Alaska for oil, and then somehow
then you
later
then you
on,
get out there, and as soon as you become president, something happens, an alternative energy source is discovered, and the price of oil plummets, and you don't need to do it anymore. So, do you still do it because you said you were going to do it, and deal with that, or do you just say like, oh, we don't need to do it anymore and stop? But people start saying like, oh, blah blah blah, you're reneging on your promise.
exactly. Or, people like the news, because obviously there will be essentially just like in real life, there'll be news. You say one thing in one state, and then you say another one, and they catch you, and so maybe you lose a few points because they're like, oh, he's very wishy-washy, but
Yeah,
maybe you do have that speaking skill, so you are able
it's
where it would have been
downplayed,
a yeah, exactly, you
or maybe one of
downplay
your
it.
skills is you have the media in your pocket, or you have you have your entire radio industry to downplay and basically put out your
Propaganda.
propaganda. There's plenty of ways to do it, but yeah, you have a situation where as you're campaigning, you have to say certain things, and then when you get into presidency, the reality of those things set in. I'm gonna take our troops out of the war that we're in there. It's easy to say on the campaign trail when you're the outside man, but as soon as you're in power and like when you start suddenly the person responsible for all these things, it weighs a lot heavier on you. And it's the reason why I thought of this game being something they should make is because I see a lot of people going like, oh, well, obviously the president should get in/out of this war. I mean, it's a lot harder to order troops someplace where they can die when you're the person responsible for them dying.
Exactly. And also at the same time, you have a running mate, and he is going to do things too. So he
Yes.
can either help
So
you or hurt
so yeah,
you.
it's a running mate that you kind of choose on the campaign trail. I mean, that's kind of traditionally how it is because the running mate is the vice president. Their only job is to break ties in the Senate and take over if you die, and a few other
Exactly.
things we've added over the years.
Mhm.
So they're basically chosen to fill out the ticket. So like if we could just take a look at President Obama right now. Like the reason why he's got Joe Biden as his running mate, he's an old white guy. I don't want to bring in race too much into this, but it's to fill out the ticket. You see this through so many different campaigns where it's like you have someone here, but this demographic you have to appeal to doesn't like this, so you find someone who appeals to that demographic and you choose that guy to fill out your gaps.
Exactly. But
But
it
maybe that
doesn't
guy who
always
helps you
work
get
too.
elected, like you can pick somebody who's going to get you elected, and you get elected, and then what their actual personality and how they do stuff, like once again, Joe Biden, he's a walking gaff machine. He goes around constantly making these kind of funny things happen.
Yep.
So you have that guy. He's gonna make these like little things for you. They don't really hurt you because there's just so many that they just kind of dismiss it. But maybe there's also a vice president that maybe he's actually on the take. Maybe like he hasn't actually done anything to influence how you do things, but suddenly the media starts saying like, oh well, he's on the take from this company, so he's making the president do this. So they could become liabilities, or if you choose really wisely, they become benefits.
Mhm.
Yeah. So yeah, so we've established you go through basically the campaign, and you have to make decisions. Like you have to hit up certain debates, but there's extra debates you can go to where you can go in there and maybe get a little more FaceTime, and hopefully it wouldn't force more people over. But also, it might be the place where someone's going to attack you on an issue. So you basically set up how you're going to go into it. But then the important thing being you become president. And as president, you would figure like, okay, now I have the power to do what I want to do, but that's just kind of not the case. You can set up your cabinet and you can kind of suggest to people what you want to do, but ultimately it's up to the Congress to pass the bills for you to sign the law. And that's where the real politics and the real game comes in there. Because you got in, you've made these promises, you have to, by your own words, by the way you've already committed, do certain things. So you have to go out there and pass certain bills, and you get them done, except that you don't have direct access to saying, "Oh, well, we're going to start this bill." You say, "Oh, I want to start this bill." Well, what if your party's not the one that happens to be in power at that point? They can't really put forward a bill that does what you want to do, or they can, or the opposite party might take whatever your suggestion is and make a bill about it. But by the time it gets to your desk, all those writers and things put onto it, like your bill you want to pass is basically death to you.
Yep. And at the same time, because yeah, you're gonna have these bills that essentially you wanted to pass and have so many writers on them that it looks nowhere close to what you wanted, and you have to choose. Do I attempt to get some backroom deals going here? Do I start making a few
Yeah,
promises, try to knock off some of these writers? Like,
yeah, and that would be a major mechanic to it is being able to go back there and strike deals with people. But basically, you can think about this: is you have a bill going through, and in just as computer programming, you have an AI where you have like over 500 different NPCs that each have their own likes and dislikes, and each one of those essentially, if they want to, like has a chance to screw up your bill. Your bill's getting screwed up, just like law of averages. One of them is just going to proc and basically go like, I don't like this bill. I'm going to throw something onto it to screw it up.
yep,
And that comes down to like you have to, you know, meet with the opposition party leader and say like, if you let me get my road infrastructure bill is passed, I'll make sure that my party deals with that. And of course, also having to deal with the fact that you can't even promise that. Like you say you'll do that, and you tell your party to do something, but then they just don't do it.
yep. And at the same time, you've got to meet diplomats. We were
Yeah, and that's
talking about it was the stress level, like whether he goes to Camp David or
yeah, like having. I mean, you actually have to deal with stress and other various factors. Just as a character, as a person playing, you have to take vacations depending on how stressful things are, and your domestic problems. I mean, they're important, but there's also international problems. You have to meet with heads of state from other countries. You have to go and bang out treaties, or at least talk to them and keep up appearances. And you never get like really a break. So it's you get stressed out enough that you have to leave and go to Camp David, and maybe there's a bunch of mini games you have to play at Camp David to drive down your stress level.
exactly,
Well,
or and then how we were talking about it is the whole kind of Clinton thing where it's you
yeah,
are
yeah, it's kind of putting
reducing
into
your
something
stress.
also where where there are certain things that could really help reduce your stress level. I'm going to put it out too right now. If you're a single person, or maybe even not that, you get a lot of stress, but you find out that you can ask for a lady of the night, or just maybe just an intern you kind of seduce and have an affair with, and that reduces your stress level. So it allows you to take longer times between breaks, able different things, and bam, you got a situation where you're you're being non-faithful to your wife, or you're doing something that's kind of questionable publicly, but it's secret, and there's a chance that it never comes to light, but there's also a chance that it's found. And just on the other side, not just having an affair, but also um, taking starting to do some sort of illegal monitoring of your political opponents, or sabotaging someone politically. Like doing that reduces your stress level, or at least takes out something that's causing you stress, but can come back to bite you on the butt or not. And that's one of the big things about it. Like you're never in that situation where the storyline of the game is, oh well, you did this, and no matter how well you covered your tracks, they found you out. It's you can do these things, and there's a 20% chance that you're going to be caught. So do you take it with just a 20% chance to be caught? Because if you do it and you succeed, great, you're able to do something. But if not, then you're pretty much screwed.
Yep. And at the same time, as president, you could be called out to throw a ball at a baseball game or things like that. So it's like
Other
you
things that affect
or
public
have to
opinion.
hold a conference, for news people.
Yeah, like a national tragedy occurs, or you just need to keep appearances and keep public opinion kind of on your side, because after dealing with this stuff back and forth, you have to go up for re-election, and that's basically having to go on the campaign trail again. And at this time, it's like you've been through campaigning, you've been through presidency. Now you got to campaign while doing the presidency.
Exactly.
You know, a jerk about it because whenever election year comes around, basically Congress and everything stops. But you still have to deal with stuff as president.
Yep.
And as president, like you have to be the person who stands by now your record, not just saying, "Oh well, it's so bad what the last guy did, or it's so bad what's going on now." You're now responsible for all the stuff, so you have to justify it to people like, "Oh blah blah blah, I did this because of this." While someone's sitting out there, kind of unfairly attacking you, saying like, "Oh well, you said you were going to end the war, and then when it happened, you didn't. Like, why didn't you?" Like, well, as a president that you can't tell them why because you know as president that this country is secretly, supplying another country, blah blah blah, backroom deals that you know about but you can't tell. So you have to find some sort of way to sell it.
Yep.
And basically, kind of holding you for first term accountable of like, okay, this is what you have to do, this is what you failed at, this is what you did, and try and basically justify continue to be president just to kind of put it in there, have that situation where, is your own party going to backstab you? Is someone who wants a little more power in your party going to kind of grandstand and take away your position or hold you hostage, essentially saying, if, I found out about your mistress, so if you don't give me an extra pork bill thing for this next thing, which will kill your approval rating, I'm going to come out with it, which will kill it even more.
Yep.
Just kind of put a little bit more of human, basically give people an idea like this is basically what the president has to do with a day to day. Because, politics is kind of the ultimate game when you think about it, and it would be a perfect kind of thing to kind of put in a computer with all the different random variables that can come into play.
Yep. And also, and we didn't really touch on it in this one, was the fact that you may lose the election.
Oh yeah, you may lose re-election
Or election, and
or your election, and you go through, say you do an entire thing like you do 8 years as president, and you want to start up again in the same country that you basically established there because you passed a few spending bills that you like and you kind of like the way that things are going, so you want to basically restart as a new character. So you select to start again with your new person, bam. But you find out, like, while you as a president, you did lots of stuff. Everyone loves you. Everyone really loves what you did. The party is extremely unpopular, like either because of policies that they did or something the news did or any sort of reason. There's a billion reasons you can have. The party is unpopular, so you have a really hard time getting reelected if you try. And if you fail, it's not, oh, well, it's over. It's you fail, there's someone else in politics.
exactly.
There's someone else as the president that you have to deal with. And, you can even do it where you become the president, but if you fail, you basically have a smaller game of the 4 years of that presidency where you're in the Senate or you're in the House of Representatives. You have to pass bills too, or maybe you just choose to re-roll your character.
Yeah, and then just get a summary of essentially what that president
Yeah.
did. So like a
Summary
jump
of what the president
forward.
did, or you actually take part in it of passing or negating bills. And if you're passing negating bills, like you can keep the same character that you rolled, or whatever things you put on there as far as like pluses and minuses, and try again. And then you have a more of a record to stand on as an outside guy, just saying like, well, I voted for this and I voted for that. Or you can just try, or if you're just like, oh, well, I didn't win, screw it, I'll just wait. And then you get a little summary saying like, oh, well, this president went and, screwed up the country really horribly. Or, this president was the most popular president of all time and blah, blah, blah. So
Yeah.
you have an idea of just like, maybe you as the president and you as a party, like you had the perfect, you got in during your campaign somehow, you were able to pull your party up to having a supermajority because like you just did everything perfectly and your party looked so good that you are president, you have a supermajority, your entire party loves you, the country loves you, so pretty much anything you want, bam, you select it, and they're going to throw it through just because they know like where their bread's buttered, screw it. So you have perfect control for 8 years. Like you go through the first term and you go for re-election, and it's a landslide again, and you do even better. In fact, in 8 years, you pass pretty much everything you want to have passed, and then you go for the next person comes up, and you didn't quite get elected, and then somebody else came along, and their political philosophy was the complete 180 of you. They went through and spent 4 years trying to repeal everything you did, or anything that's not repealed was destroyed. Like, okay, well, now you have to work all towards that again to try and get those things passed.
Exactly. And, it's one of those things at the same time, you may spend the first 4 years kind of like towing the line and, fighting. And then, because you're having a bad one. And then the last 4 years, you're just like, screw it, I'm getting that one piece passed. Like,
Yeah,
at the end, and like, you shut down everyone, you're vetoing, you're making backroom deals so that you can do it. So, I mean, it's never gonna, like, it may not always be a or obviously, it won't always be a landslide. In fact, it'll probably be the opposite. But,
more
um,
often than not, you're gonna piss somebody off that's gonna cause problems for you.
exactly. But I mean, there's the thing is like it's always going to be different when you get into the presidency. When you're like, you're not always going to have the same options. You're not always going to have the same current events, and so your characters obviously is not going to always have the same skills. And whether you decide you want to like challenge level by setting like having your character be paranoid or having your character be um, what's another good one? A kleptomaniac would even be an interesting one.
Yeah,
So
there's a lot of different things you can do with
he
it.
goes out on a diplomatic thing and steals something from
Steals,
one.
yeah, steals, steals some important artifact from their culture.
Yeah, exactly. So,
But yeah, you got there's so many different things you can have happen where it's just
yeah, it's like you make a back, or you make there's a senator and he's very old, and you make a deal with him, and oh, it sucks. He dies. All your deal that you just spent on is done, and that bill that you just put in because that guy died, no one knows it. What you were doing with that
yeah,
guy, and
no one knows that yeah you were having a backroom deal with the opposing party leader saying if you get these people to let this through without putting too much on it, not only will we get this cancer cure research bill funded, but doing that, I will make sure that these people, that my side takes away spending limits on, or not spending limits, but a taxation on this type of thing, which when you're playing as president, like the economists come up to you and say like, oh no, the what's going on right now is a fluke. If we just adjust the tax rate slightly, they pay less taxes. We have to spend less money doing stuff, and we get more money. So it's a perfect all around deal. Like it's win 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 win. Like there's no bad part about this, but because you and this person have a good rapport, he's going to do it. Then he dies. And
yeah,
then the next guy comes up, as some hotshot young Turk trying to make a name for himself, and you're just like, well, let's make this deal. And he comes out, and he's not going to listen to you. He just comes out on the radio and says like, oh well, well, I'm not going to have any backroom deals. Any sort of deal like that should be done on the floor. And then you're like, well, I don't want to say that in front of people because if I say that's what we are going towards, there might be someone who tries to hold things, hostage. They might say like, well, that's all well and good, but I want, extra spending for my congressional district, so I won't go along with it unless blah, 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 because it's all public now. Or maybe you're in the midst of, just random generation of events. You're developing legislation on laser guns. Like laser guns have been permitted has been developed in your scientific community to the point where you actually have like laser rifles, and you have to figure out like how are we going to legislate on this, and you're close to having a deal, and then all of a sudden, gigantic massacre, like thousands dead, blah blah blah, with some guy who goes crazy with a laser gun, and then it's like the whole gun debate thing, which once again it doesn't matter what side you're on because every time that happens, it's both sides butting heads, so it doesn't matter what side you're on it. If the public views you as right or wrong, things are going to happen.
yeah, exactly. At the same time, because we're kind of hitting the same thing, so I'm going to move it towards the next progression. Everybody kind of knows the essentials of from running to presidency to the next character you choose.
And
So
the fact that you're president, like you're supposed to have all this power, but really the game. I mean, it's kind of the nihilistic way of saying the game plays you.
yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
but I mean that's popular. I mean, that's what The Sims does. It basically, they say like, "Oh, well, do this for me." Okay, click. I've done it for you.
Exactly.
This with international politics that result in changing lives of millions.
Exactly. So, with that being said, now it goes kind of to where you could go with it, which is how we were talking about last time, which is the DLCs, where you could
Yeah.
essentially.
It's because we're not going to do any of these things talking about a game that could be made without saying like there's actually a good reason to make these because I mean companies are pretty much in love with DLC and ways to monetize stuff afterwards. And I mean, it's pretty obvious. You could just put out DLC packs that just change the setting. You can change the setting to something like historical fiction. You can change it so that you're basically doing the same thing, but in the Dark Ages or Rome when they had
The Senate, the
the Senate
Republic.
there. Or you can change it so it's the future,
You can make it a galactic
a galactic
thing.
republic, or yeah, you even start off like if you get presidency the first time, that's when you have a chance of discovering the aliens, and then it's like, oh well, what do I do? Do I show people the aliens because I'm not sure how they're going to react, and how are you going to deal with if like you somehow you don't get in presidency? And the next president takes over while you're trying to make your new character, and he just botches introducing aliens to people. So everyone's just super xenophobic. They hate aliens. But as a government, as an institution, we really like aliens because they're way more advanced than us and they can kill the crap out of us if they just decide to.
Yep.
And we want to keep them happy, but everyone hates them. So how are you going to do that? It is, and maybe like the ramifications and things you have to do with cloning, and well, what do you do about the clone vote? If people clone themselves, do those clones technically get a vote if they're conscious? Then what prevents some like rich crazy guy like Rupert Murdoch from cloning himself a couple million times and just voting whatever he wants into law?
Yep. And so, I mean, you can do it through time. You can do it in different countries.
You could have an entire fantasy race where rather than being a complete source of evil, Sauron was just a very very conservative down home kind of guy, and you can actually negotiate with these sources of evil. Like you can negotiate with the dragon as the king of this area or the elected president, and you have to raise taxes because you want to pay off this dragon because you don't want to put the troops forward to having to kill them or having to deal with your treaty with the Mer people of Atlantis. There's plenty of things you can do as far as DLC if there's taking the exact same concept, the exact same engine, just basically substituting one type of thing for another.
Yep. Yeah, there's essentially a lot of possibilities that can be taken from future to past to fantasy.
Other types of government, maybe you do have the Senate or other sort of elected body you have to deal with, but maybe you start I don't want to use Game of Thrones because that's what everyone uses, but in Game of Thrones where you have to do certain things based on how your relationship with other people is going. 'Cause I've played plenty of games where that's like a sub game, and that's almost always the most fun part about those games is that little sub game about like having to manage your politics. I mean, we talked about this last time. Dragon Divinity,
Yeah.
Dragon Commander. Like the entire game is basically kind of this really slimmed down RTS, but the really fun part of that game is popping in and you have a representation of the undead race, the elf race, the dwarfs, the lizard people, and the goblins. And the most fun you have in that game is like talking to the representatives and passing laws and blah 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 and trying to manage like how much one side hates you and what side loves you and all that stuff. And just why not? I mean, there are games out there that kind of cater to this, but never ones that actually try to take a really robust and realistic approach to the concept where you don't really have that much power directly. You just have this kind of puppeteering string where like you can kind of say go this way, I'll put the treat over here, but the puppy has to move over to get it. So yeah, there's so many different ways you can implement that. This is a genre that it does exist. I've seen a few types of games like this, but I've not seen a really earnest attempt to make a really big game out of this with enough realism in there to make it, really authentic to the actual thing. Maybe a little bit because most people who are developing games don't want to get into the entire concept of politics. I can't even imagine how that would be. There's just so many things you can add to something like a political game. Like imagine a game where you are making decisions, but in order to get the idea of what the public wants, like how do you do that? Do you have the option to put out a public opinion poll, but those can come back skewed. I mean, we have an entire news networks about basically skewing public opinion polls one way or the other by asking loaded questions. So do you go that having actual like kind of parodies of current news networks of like Fox News and MSNBC and CNN where like one side's way left, one side's way right, one side's in the middle, and they'll just report about what's going on and quote unquote how the country sees you. So like you get an idea of like, okay, how does the right see my politics? And the right loves you because you've been really stringent on making sure the government's lean and efficient and trying to not do things as much as possible. But you find out there's a little bit of a fringe there that doesn't like you because you're putting forward a few too many social programs. And then there's the left media that loves the fact that you're putting out social programs, but they're very upset that you're not including certain demographics in your laws, like you've forgotten to include gays in your marriage bill, blah blah blah. And that's a great thing that can be added to these things. A lot of stuff like that, like not just news networks, but also maybe newspapers and Twitter, and you have all these different things you can grab information from. But the real point is that you don't ever have an exact picture. The beauty of something like this would be that a lot of the fun would come from obfuscating those numbers. You don't know exactly what your chances of success, but three guys that you know are good at doing their jobs tell you that you're pretty good at doing success, so you can go forward. And then, maybe they were wrong. Maybe there was some sort of vital clue that they didn't get that would have proven everything for you. But you didn't know that for sure, so you went forward, sometimes putting, the proverbial foot in your mouth. That you've done something that you wouldn't have done if you knew, but part of the point is that you don't know for sure. So you have to kind of get that presidential feel of when do I lead, when do I let things go, when do I let my hands off stuff. Joey, help me out here. Say something. Anything.
I'm just letting you go.
Because it's interesting to hear a nerd just kind of talk at a nice, soothing tone for a long time. A lot of people talk about games where you have skill. And skill comes down from having an exact input method that you can put in an exact, down to forward fierce punch to throw a fireball. But there's lots of games out there where a sluggish or imperfect controls ruin the game. While strategy games, they kind of give you too perfect control. Like you are given the ability to send a lone troop in an RTS to his death, which, yeah, I mean, would probably happen, 9 times out of 10, but that 1 out of 10 times when you tell that one, grunt, oh, run off 5 miles that way so I can scout and see if anything's there. You can imagine that, like you say, a grunt go off that way, and the grunt says, go fuck yourself, and he defects because you just sent him on a suicide mission.
Hmm.
That's the kind of thing where there's a little bit of reality. There's a little bit of having to hedge your bets. That you don't have exact control over an RTS, something that is almost notorious for having too much control over things. That a little bit of things are randomized and automated, so you can't immediately go in there. Well, I've been ranting for quite a while now, so
I was just like, man, he wants to talk. Go for it. Get the beer. Just
okay.
keep going.
It's Coors Light. It doesn't make me that drunk. This in particular actually would be kind of a difficult thing to do because there's just so many different aspects. But if you actually got on the ground floor, no one's touching you on this one for a while. Because I have to imagine that there's got to be some sort of desire in the community for this. Video game players are, by and large, either basically autistic or nerds. And both those demographics want to basically see how you would actually be able to play your hand at politics. How well would you do at politics? You know, you're so much better, you're smarter, and you have this idea of how things are going to go. But seeing really how things are going to go and how in things that actually do matter, how well would you do? And then you can kind of see just how things go.
It's a political simulation that goes from election to the end of your term in a way that is not the typical all powerful. It actually has the politics and the real life situations that continually get in your way, take a bill out of the running to make you have to veto your own bill because it has so many stipulations on it. You have just gone insane. And the fact that you're making backwater deals and perhaps bedroom deals just to lower your stress, or going to Camp David and playing some fun maybe mini games. At the end of the 8 years, you still wind up having the ability to play, but you will play from the next president, and you'll have to do it all over again. And it won't be the same, obviously, because there'll be new laws, there'll be new candidates for senators and lobbyists, and you'll just continue going. And then, as I said, DLC can go anywhere to adding in new situations, to different time periods, and to different forms of political government. So that's essentially it. It has a very interesting setup, and it's not as easy to describe, but I think if done well, it would drive people to get it, no matter what side of the political spectrum they're on.
Yeah. Well, basically, when you make a politics game, you take a middle ground, and like I said, you know, it would be a kind of a difficult thing to actually develop because you need to have a idea of how politics works and a way to program it. But like I said, once you have that, whatever company, you know, bites the bullet, does this, it's going to be basically one of those civilization games, one of those games that is kind of monumental as far as this is the game you go for that. No one else is going to come and encroach on your territory because it's a lot of work and you've already got the monopoly on it.
So there you go. That's Imagine the Possibilities with a drunken Mcleod and me just jumping in at the end here, essentially. So for those two people that are probably still listening to this, we will see you on the next one. And thank you for listening, and please subscribe.
Thank you.